Reaches, oh, that ball's out, that's live! Back the other way, Sam Hubbard! The Cincinnati Kid! Hubbard's got a convoy! Chased by Andrews! At the 30, the 20, he will score!
To the end zone, down the field, and it is deflected, and gone! Touchdown! A.J. Green!
Goes back to throw. Men are coming late. Looks right down the middle. There's Eddie Brown. He has it at the 35 to the 30. He may go 10-5. Touchdown.
Now the Bengals Super Bowl chances rest on his right foot. The kick is up.
Yeah.
It is good.
Corey Dillon, he's gone. The knockout punch, you're looking at it. 65 yards.
And they're back to throw as the blitz is on. Goes long, intended for Collinsworth. He has it down to the 20. Touchdown. And Chris Collinsworth.
Throwing the long ball. Deep down the field. Chad Johnson's got it. Touchdown. Cincinnati.
Look at Chase go. Oh my goodness, what a gear he just found. Case for the touchdown. Wow, Chase is on the case.
It is no fluke. It is a fact. The Cincinnati Bengals are headed to Super Bowl 56. The play clock at 3. Shotgun snap. Carr throws into traffic. Intercepted. Jermaine Pratt has the football.
Yeah.
Coffin nails.
Bam, bam, bam. How about that?
Welcome in, everybody. Chatterbox Bengals here with you after the Bengals Week 9 win. Pardon me, little out of breath. Just had to do 41 push-ups because our wonderful live chat got us to 100 likes during the game stream there. Of course, when I sign up for the push-ups, they just got to score 41, so that's great, Craig. But I'm here and I'm ready to go. Probably the best vibes after a game that we've seen all year long.
I mean, I'm going to try and do my best to stay positive here.
You have to. You have to.
Always come into these shows with extremely positive vibes. I'm a negative Nancy a lot of times. Look, the Bengals were near perfect for probably 70 to 75% of that game. There was another 25 to 30% of it where they didn't look great. I'm going to ignore that last drive by the Raiders. Yeah. That's whatever. There's certainly still things for this team to get better at. But the bottom line is that they did what they were supposed to do against this Raiders team who's not very good. They took advantage of the offensive line and the injuries that stacked up against this Raiders team over the course of this game. And Joe Burrow did what Joe Burrow did and scores 5 touchdowns through the air. Overall, got to be really happy with what you saw out of this Bengals team today. And now the focus shifts almost immediately to Thursday night in a absolutely huge matchup against the Baltimore Ravens.
That's right. And I know a lot of people outside of obviously the main focus for the Bengals sitting at 3-5 is to win the game in front of you, but you can't help but to scoreboard watch and look ahead and see what other results would mean for this team at this point. And I know a lot of people were focused on that Broncos-Ravens game, and if the Broncos were able to take care of business, then the Bengals have a chance next week against Baltimore to get to the same 5-5 record and kind of be right back in the mix for the AFC North. Well, the Ravens didn't let that door open at all, put their foot on the throat of the Broncos, and showed that they are a legitimate contender in the AFC, and it's just a slip up against the Raiders and a slip up against the Browns. They do have the ability to beat the really good teams, or I guess the playoff teams. The Broncos are certainly a playoff team in the AFC right now, sitting at 5 wins and a convincing win for the Ravens, but we'll focus on next week when it gets here. This week was massive for the Bengals. Coming into it, I said that this was the biggest game left on the Bengals schedule. I think this is the last chance before you get in a 4-week stretch or a 4-game, 5-week stretch with the bye in there, where you have to play competitors every single week. You go Ravens, Chargers, Steelers, Cowboys. You have to play those teams. You have to play well in order to beat those teams. This was our last chance at a get-right game, if you will, to get everything clicking, and both sides of the ball, for the most part, got right. The offense was phenomenal, and the defense up until the end really showed a lot, and it's that next man up mentality. We saw Jordan Battle make a great play on a PBU. We saw Cody Ford really do a great job at right tackle today, or left tackle today, sorry, in replacement of Orlando Brown. And then Mike Gesicki steps up and has a 100-yard receiving game when we talked all pregame about not having great weapons because Jermaine Burton's inactive, Charlie Jones out, T. Higgins out. This game, this story was the story of the next man up, and that's great to see for this Bengals team as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of big positives coming out of this one. I think, again, we're going to talk a lot about it. We're going to wait until after Zach Taylor has his press conference and we can see what kind of quotes we get out of him before we really talk about the Jermaine Burton situation. But like it says, I mean, next man up, right? So Jamar Chase without T. Higgins has quite honestly not been the Jamar Chase that we know, not quite as explosive as the Jamar Chase that we like to see. Today he goes 7 catches, only 43 yards. A lot of those catches behind the line of scrimmage. Now without T. Higgins on the year, last week he goes 9 catches, only 54 yards. The first 2 weeks of the year, 6 catches for 62 yards, 4 catches for 35 yards. So Jamar Chase without T. Higgins has been an issue, and it's always been a question of who's going to step up and take on that role when T. Higgins is out. And it felt like today that Joe Burrow really wanted to lean on Andre Yoshibas.
Yeah.
And Andre just quite frankly couldn't step up to the plate and pick up where T. Higgins left off. And so Joe Burrow had to turn to the next best weapon, and that was Mike Gesicki. And Mike Gesicki came through with a number of really high-quality catches.
Yeah.
Strong hands early in the game on a play where he was completely draped by the Raiders defender. Later in the game with jumping catch, obviously the 2 touchdowns that he adds as well. A really high-quality game out of Mike Gesicki. And as Joe Burrow looks to find who his next man up is going to be, Mike Gesicki seems to be that guy. And every time T. Higgins is not there, Mike Gesicki seems to be the one to step up. We thought maybe we'd get Jermaine Burton today. That wasn't the case. We'll talk about that later. But the bottom line is that Mike Gesicki is really showing the ability to be what we talked about in this preseason about kind of being your slot receiver. And he showed it again today that he can absolutely take on that role when he's asked. And with the Eric All injury that I don't know that we found a official announcement on yet, but didn't look good, Mike Gesicki will continue to need to step in. Drew Sample will also need to step up. Drew Sample with a touchdown today after the Eric All injuries as well. So all over the field, number of guys stepping up into unexpected positions, and for the most part, really performed pretty well.
I know that Jamar Chase not having a great game without T. Higgins has sort of become the expectation at this point, which does really hurt. But for Joe Burrow to have a 5-touchdown game and Jamar Chase not have one of them is really a huge boost for me when it comes to talking about this team, because what was the conversation just 2 weeks ago when T. Higgins got hurt? This team's way too Jamar and T. Higgins centric. And I don't know that I necessarily saw anything today that made me optimistic about any of these guys as a long-term wide receiver option, but it at least showed that this team scored 41 points without T. Higgins giving you anything, with Jamar Chase giving you very little production. That's not something that I thought was really possible. I mean, the other games that we've been without T. Higgins and Jamar Chase has played poorly, the Bengals have escaped in incredibly low-scoring games. Kudos to great defensive play. The defense played great today, but the offense scored 41 points. You beat anyone scoring 41 points in regulation. So incredible feeling for this offense to be able to perform without huge numbers from Jamar Chase and no T. Higgins. But my question with Mike Gesicki comes back to what we talked about last week. Where does he go when T. Higgins comes back? Because that's 100 yards today on 5 catches. He had 73 on 7 catches last week. Without T. Higgins against the Chiefs, he had 7 grabs for 91 yards. This is a guy that's been an incredibly productive receiver when you put a little bit more on his plate. But it seems like when you ask him to be the 3rd or 4th option in the offense, he just completely disappears. I hope when T. Higgins gets back and is healthy, Zach Taylor and these offensive coaches don't shy away from continuing to use Mike Gesicki. He's a really, really good piece of this offense.
Well, I think the question is it Zach Taylor shying it away, or is it Joe Burrow shying away? When you have 2 elite wide receivers, how often are you making it through your progression where you're finding yourself to the 3rd wide receiver option? And that's quite frankly hasn't had to happen most times because T. Higgins is typically open, and if he's not open, you trust him to go up and make contested catches.
Right.
When they're blanketing T, then they're leaving Jamar Chase open. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. I think ultimately, this team has to have two weapons, and I think we've seen that. And today was Mike Gesicki that stepped up and was able to be that second weapon. But I think that really speaks volumes about what the offense can be, right? Is that they don't have to have 5 different guys that can be explosive on the outside. They don't need that. As long as they have 2 guys that they can rely on, this team can be successful. And when you have, another guy in Chase Brown adding 27 carries for 120 yards, and then he adds 5 catches out of the backfield for 37 yards and a touchdown, you've got 3 legitimate weapons that the defense has to worry about. And again, we'll step back and say, look, this Raiders defense is not very good. We recognize that.
Right.
But the fact of the matter still remains that Joe Burrow started this game 15 for 15 for 104 yards. And the first interception came on a pass where Max Crosby got a little tip on a screen. So, I think it goes to show that, first and foremost, that we don't have to have multiple explosive receivers, and maybe T is more expendable than we thought. The other piece of it, and probably the more accurate piece of it, is that Joe Burrow is him. And Joe Burrow is absolutely a top 2 quarterback in this league, and anybody who doesn't watch the Bengals probably doesn't know that. But
absolutely,
every time you watch him, just his ability to make plays, fit balls into tight windows, be able to be accurate while on the move. I mean, he does everything well. When it comes to physically playing this game, I still have questions about pre-snap reads and some of the other decisions that have been made pre-snap. But when that ball is in play and he has it in his hands, there's very few other guys that I would trust to the level that I trust Joe Burrow to make a play.
I 100% agree, and that's what it came down to today was the ability to make plays. We've not talked about it a lot over the last few weeks, but the most underrated part of Joe Burrow's game is his legs. And today he really used his legs in a lot of great, crucial situations for the Bengals. Only sacked once for a loss of 8 yards, and that's honestly more of a credit to Joe Burrow, I think, after watching today's game than it is to the offensive line. Obviously, a 1-sack game credit is certainly due towards the offensive line, but the amount of times Joe Burrow was able to get a pass off when a guy was either in his chest, pushing him to the ground, draped on his left arm, and he's throwing it one-handed, or simply running for his life, working his way back to the line and dumping it off to an open receiver. Joe Burrow was phenomenal today off platform, and that just goes to the next man up. That's just part of his game that he has to improve on when you have Orlando Brown out. I think you know that you're going to have more opportunities with guys in the offensive backfield when you have Cody Ford playing left tackle. And we know the struggles that the interior has faced this year. And Mims, I think he's going to be a great player, but this is still very, very young into his NFL career. Joe Burrow knew that there were some deficiencies there, and he wasn't worried about getting off platform. He wasn't scared by the pressure and immediately tucking to run. He ran to throw, and it resulted in not just 1 touchdown, it resulted in 2 touchdowns out of his 5. And then how many other times did it extend the drive? I think as we see Joe Burrow continue to mold his game to what each game presents as the need for the Bengals offense in order to give them the ability to win, it just continues to prove how crucial he is for this team. Can he throw for 200 yards and 5 touchdowns and get a win? Absolutely. We just saw it. Can he throw for 405 touchdowns and take you to the brink against the Raiders or against the Ravens? For sure. We've seen it. And then he wins games throwing 150 when you're able to win games 17-10 or whatever it was against the Giants. This is different stuff that proves that you're a great quarterback, not a good quarterback. Not having to win games the same way every week, it just continues to prove that Joe Burrow really is just one of one, and we're incredibly lucky to have him here.
Yeah, and the Bengals need to continue to invest in protecting him. And I know that we've taken a big step, adding the Browns on the outside. Amarius Mims has shown certainly the ability to be an everyday starting tackle. 99 true pass block snaps now for Amarius Mims on the season. 0 hits, 0 sacks allowed out of the rookie. Those are the types of things that you're going to need to see. On the flip side, though, the interior of this offensive line is still a liability. And I know a lot of people are focusing this week, especially with the trade deadline looming, about improving at corner, improving on the defensive line. I wouldn't be opposed to the Bengals going out and seeing if there's an interior offensive lineman available at this deadline as well to continue to stack pieces on this line to protect Joe Burrow, because the few times that Joe Burrow was pressured and the sack itself as well, was it just either miscommunications by the offensive line, which we've seen over and over again, or just missed assignments, or
Right.
a number of other things, and it's seemingly always on this interior of the offensive line, specifically on Alex Kappa and Volson. And so that'll be the question moving forward is, okay, we've got our tackles of the future, hopefully, with the Browns and Amarius Mims. What's next? Does Matt Lee need to step in, and does he get more opportunities at guard maybe? Does the Bengals go out and make a trade to pick up an interior lineman? I think everybody saw it, yourself included, and everyone on social media, but there was a play in the third quarter where Volson is like pointing out blitzers and calling protections, and then what happens? They blitz right at him. They go Volson doesn't block him at all, and the sack on Joe Burrow just completely uncontested. So, that's the one area that, is a little scary for me. And when you face good defenses, can take advantage of that mismatch. Worked out today for the Bengals that the Raiders aren't that great on the interior, but it is something that definitely needs to be addressed.
Something else that was big about this game, and I know it's something easy to gloss over because most teams have a lot of them, but this is the Bengals' first home win of the year. I think that means a lot in getting this fan base back excited about this team. Going down to Paycor, I've seen a lot of sentiment about people not excited to go back to the stadium. Getting a 41-24 win at home where the offense is clicking and everyone really looks good, I think that's a big, big boost for this fan base and how the season goes forward, how we're able to turn the page next week facing Baltimore. I think a lot of fans are going to be a lot like me. This is what you wanted to see against a bad team in order to get, quote unquote, back in, at least for a 1 week stretch against Baltimore. If we would have went out and beat the Raiders 17-10 or anything like we've seen them beat the Panthers, the Giants, and the Browns before, I would have had no added confidence going into Baltimore that this was going to be any kind of different team than we've seen before. I think this at least gives me a little boost emotionally that this team has a little fight, and that's all we've asked for, is to continue to have a chance. And now we have a chance to go into Baltimore and go 5-5. A home win is huge. That would even be bigger to get back to 500. But the other thing that's going to continue to help get fans in, and something people in our chat on YouTube here have been asking for all day for us to talk about, is the reports from Diana Rossini and Sports Illustrated that the Bengals are burning up the phone lines trying to make a trade deadline addition at corner or defensive end or defensive tackle. This is something that we've both kind of brushed off all trade deadline season just because it's not something the Bengals ever do. Thought it was a waste of time to really talk about trade deadline moves, but it seems like the Bengals at least are putting up the front that they're committed to winning here and trying to improve this team down the stretch as we near the end of the season and the trade deadline on Tuesday. Craig, I know there's a couple names everyone's been throwing around. Azeez Ojulari from the Giants, the edge rusher, corner from the Rams, Tre'Davious White, a lot of other names being tossed around as trade deadline targets for the Bengals. Number one, I think the most important question, do you believe these reports? Do you think the Bengals are actually being proactive and trying to make a move? Or do you think they're just putting on a front for a fan base that's pretty fed up?
Well, I think if they have any expectation to continue to give this fan base any sort of hope this year, that they need to do something. And whether the calls are a front or not, at the end of the day, I'm tired of watching around the league and valuable guys being picked up for trade swaps or late round picks. I mean, those are the type of things that every time you see it, you're like, why wouldn't the Bengals do that exact same move? It makes no sense. But you look at it, and Kelsey Conway had it earlier this week, and you just mentioned it, but the Bengals don't make in-season moves. The last time the Bengals made an in-season move regarding a player was 2020 when they moved Carlos Dunlap to Seattle and they received BJ Finney. Prior to that, the last in-season trade where they acquired a player was 1972. So in 52 years of the Cincinnati Bengals, they've made 2 in-season trades where they acquired a player.
Right.
2. So I think it's one of those situations where if the Bengals really want to tell the fan base that we're for real, we want you to continue to spend your money and come to these games and buy concessions and buy merchandise and pay for parking, they need to go out and make a move that shows that they are serious about this, because everyone, ourselves included, know that there are still holes on this team that need to be addressed. There's nobody sitting here saying, hey, this team on paper right now is good enough to win a Super Bowl. But if you were to sit there and tell me, hey, the Bengals went out and they acquired a defensive lineman and a cornerback, I may look at you and say, okay, well, give them a week to adjust to the system and everything else. But maybe this is a legitimate move, and maybe this team is actually trying to compete. But the word on the street every single year around Mike Brown is that all they care about is money. And so for a team who has $9 million in cap space, last I checked, for a team who does not draft well, go out, give up some capital in the draft, address your needs, and let's bring in somebody and compete to advance in the playoffs this year. And, you know, I think, as obviously Joe Burrow believes it, I believe it. We talked about it this week. Even sitting at 4-5, the way this AFC is shaping out, you are 100% still in the mix.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely,
they've got to make a move.
You do. You do have to make a move. And if Jermaine Burton is going to not give you anything, still waiting on Zach Taylor's press conference for more clarity there, then I think something else you should be exploring is a wide receiver 3. And it's just because of T. Higgins' inability to stay on the field. We've seen how much this team takes a step back. Mike Gesicki, 100 yards. Without that kind of production from the tight end position today, you really don't have a lot from the receiving room. Jamar Chase, like we've talked about a bunch, unable to put up massive numbers without a number 2 wide receiver. Whether that's on him, on the scheme, or on defense's rolling coverage his way. If I'm the Bengals, I'm exploring cheap wide receiver 3 options for the rest of this season. I think that's something that I would certainly be interested in bringing in and opening up this offense, because if T. Higgins has to miss 2 or 3 more games this season for whatever other soft tissue injury is going to pop up during a Friday walkthrough, I would like to have another option to take some of those snaps off of Yoshivas Jones, and if Jermaine Burton ever gets on a good enough page to play. So I think there's a lot of positions that not only the Bengals would benefit from trading for, but are out there to be traded for, which I think is just as big of a piece of this whole thing. A lot of times we talk about the Bengals' needs, and those things aren't out there. It certainly seems like they are, and those teams are actively shopping good players at the positions of need. So I certainly hope that the Bengals can make a move and improve this team. Vibes going into Thursday night after this win and an infusion of talent into this team, they might be as high as we could have ever expected after the start we had to this season. I don't know that Bengals fans would really feel much better than after a Tuesday edition of a starter to this team, and then going into Baltimore on Thursday night and hopefully getting to 500. But the hero of this game...
Real quick. Mo Egger from 1530 ESPN Radio said it best. He said, this was during the game or shortly after, he said, beat a bad team on Sunday, trade for some help on Monday, beat a good team on Thursday. And I think that's really where the Bengals are at right now. I mean, go all in, bring in the guys that you think need to be here, and let's turn this thing around. And you mentioned it, Zach Taylor press conference is now complete. Our friend Charlie Goldsmith with some quotes on that I want to touch on before we move forward into Chase Brown and the rest of this rundown, because I know people want to talk about it. So first and foremost, before we get into Jermaine Burton, I want to mention, again, Zach Taylor, there's a lot more we can do better. Little things that stunted drives on offense. It could have been a bigger output day had we been on the same page with some communication things. This is what I talked about before, the interior of that offensive line, very clearly not on the same page on many plays.
Yeah.
The other thing that obviously had a big effect on the outcome, not really on the outcome, but on the final score, was on that final drive where the Bengals had a substitution error and then had the delay of game that pushed them back. Again, things that didn't matter in the long run, but when you go into Thursday night and you face a team like the Ravens, things that are going to matter. Now for the things that I think this chat really wants to hear about and talk about. Zach Taylor on Jermaine Burton. First and foremost, I think it's important to talk about this, and I think we knew this. Quote, he was a big part of the plan coming into this week. So we knew that. T. Higgins was going to be down. We expected him to be out this week. The expectation around the Cincinnati fan base was that this was going to be Jermaine Burton's coming out week. Zach Taylor seems to echo that. And then he goes on to say, quote, late in the week, we had to handle our business the right way. It was the right decision to sit Jermaine today. He's going to have a really good career here. We're going to support him. Today was a necessary step for him to make. Jermaine understands the situation. His best days are ahead of him. We're going to help him get there. Now, Zach didn't come out and directly say it, but there's enough reports out there now that I am in this boat. And I tweeted it out yesterday and said, look, there were no reliable reports of what was going on with Jermaine Burton. There were a lot of people talking. There's nothing reliable in terms of what actually happened. We find out basically as soon as Jermaine Burton is announced as inactive for today, that he did in fact miss walkthrough yesterday morning. He was a quote, no call, no show to the walkthrough. Now, let's start there. I want to go back a little bit farther after a minute, but let's get your initial reaction to, first and foremost, the report that he did miss practice, and then after that, the quotes from Zach Taylor about him being part of the plan and how he's going to have a good career here in the long term.
I think the two camps here on this situation, at least as the story continues to unravel, is we need to focus on winning. Who cares if he skipped practice? He needs to be in there if he gives us the best chance to win. And then the other side, which is more where I stand, is you can't win long-term if you have no culture in your building. And if you let guys skip practice without any kind of punishment, then you have no culture in your building. I think sitting a guy that is reportedly late to one practice and skips another is exactly the right call. I think that's a big picture item that you make and you show guys that, hey, this is unacceptable here. We're a team trying to win a Super Bowl. We're a team trying to crawl out of a pretty big hole we dug ourselves in the preseason, in the beginning of the season. You can't have guys missing practice. That's just not something professionals do. You can't have that. You have a guy who has a massive opportunity in front of him, a chance to break out. Zach Taylor said a massive, massive part of this game plan this week. You can lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink. Jermaine Burton clearly does not want to drink. How many more opportunities can we give this guy without any kind of punishment? I was already sitting here saying, who cares if he knows the playbook or knows what routes to run? We can coach him through that. Just get him out there and let him run streaks. Now we have to let him skip practice too? I don't get it. I don't get the people that think he should have had to play. Sure, he should have been playing, because I think it's a much bigger picture problem if you let guys skip practice and just play in games without any kind of repercussions.
Yeah, I mean, Zach Taylor to maybe to his detriment, he is a culture guy.
Yeah,
like
right.
His role, even though with the offensive play calling and everything else, Zach Taylor is a culture guy. And we've talked about, if nothing else, the thing that Zach Taylor does well is he's created a culture where players want to play for him and believe in him. And I think this was, as he called it, a necessary step, right? Is it hard to swallow when a guy who's expected to be a top one or two receiver for you this week has to be sat down? Absolutely. Is it beneficial that this happened against the Raiders and not against the Ravens? Maybe a little bit. But I think for me, what I go back to, and this is the question that, I think a lot of people have to continue to ask, is I go back to draft day, Jacob, and I go back to Nick Saban's reaction when the Bengals drafted Jermaine Burton. And I went back and I found it, and I pulled up the clip and I read the quotes, and here's what Nick Saban had to say about Jermaine Burton literally as the Bengals announced him as their draft pick. He said, emotional maturity is the best way to say it. Do the right things all the time. There's a difference between playing with emotion and being emotional. When you get emotional, you make bad decisions and you lose your brain. He does everything right. He's a competitor on the field, but off the field, he's got a lot of maturing still left to do. And I think that ultimately is exactly what came down to it.
Yep.
Now, there's been a lot of conversation, Jacob, about the Bengals' lack of scouting department. There's been conversations around a lot of different things as it pertains to the draft. The Bengals knew what they were getting with Jermaine Burton.
Absolutely.
And you look back at some other players who have been drafted and some of the off the field issues that have happened, and teams typically find a way to affect the outcome of that player. But I continue to look at situations where the Bengals have had players who were known liabilities that they have not been able to turn into a professional, I guess is the best way to put it. And Jermaine Burton is the latest example, but I go back even to the Marvin Lewis era, and it's just been this way with the Bengals for a long time. You look at Vontaze Burfict, and he wasn't able to change the way he played, and he was suspended multiple times. You know, God rest his soul. You look at guys like Chris Henry, who had multiple off the field issues throughout his career. The Bengals as an organization have not figured out how to take these quote unquote at-risk players and turn them into professionals. And so to take a risk on a guy who you knew was a potential liability off the field. Now, granted, he's not getting into legal trouble. He's just lazy and likes to sleep in. That's a lot different. But they're clearly not putting the tools around these guys to turn them into professionals.
Right.
Like that's the thing that's frustrating. And you heard from Jermaine Burton this week, and Bruce just put it in the chat. He said, I can't put myself in. Well, guess what? You had a chance this week and you took yourself out.
Right.
So you may not be able to put yourself in, but you can certainly take yourself out. And time again, this Bengals organization hasn't had the opportunity or hasn't been able to capitalize on Jermaine Burton's talent because of the off the field issues.
And I think I'm officially throwing in the white flag. Until Jermaine Burton shows me that he wants to be out there as bad as I want him out there, I think I'm gonna stop fighting for it. I'm gonna stop screaming for it. And once he's out there and he continues to produce and proves that he is taking it seriously enough to be on the field for the long term, then I'll get back in his camp. I think Jermaine Burton's gonna be a very, very good player for the Bengals at some point in his career. But when it comes to 2024, maybe this year, this rookie season is just gonna be a wash for Burton as he figures out how to be a professional and hopefully moves forward as a difference maker in this offense. But it certainly doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon. Someone that is a difference maker in this offense and really put their stamp on that position today, Chase Brown. Chase Brown was left all to his lonesome in the backfield today with the neck injury to Zach Moss. He's the only running back that got any carries. He got 27 carries, and he took them for 120 yards, no touchdowns, did have one through the air. Chase Brown proving that he is a bell cow back. I think that's what we learned today. You don't need the Zach Moss change of pace secondary back with Chase Brown. He's the guy, and we have a guy. And as long as you give him enough carries to get him that tread and get him in a groove and get rolling in a game, he can do some really special things. I'm very, very excited about Chase Brown. This was a massive, massive game for him, and my optimism in him as the true lead back of this Bengals offense. The rushing attack has been a big talking point as we continue to see Joe Mixon tear it up in Houston. A lot of people continue to post those stat lines and say, wish he was in Cincinnati. Well, I think it's important to give these guys credit that are here when they do perform, and today Chase Brown absolutely performed. He had 37 yards through the air on 5 catches for a touchdown, and then those 27 carries on the ground for 120 yards. That's a true lead back. That's a guy taking his touches and making the most out of them. Just over 30 touches on the day and really making a difference. I absolutely love what I saw out of Chase Brown today. He really gave me some optimism every time he touched the ball. The burst is insane. If he finds even the smallest sliver in that defense, he's taking it for a chunk play. I absolutely love what I saw from Chase Brown.
Yeah, I liked a lot about what I saw out of Chase Brown today. And I texted you before the game. You talked about it during the game, obviously. I texted you beforehand. I went low thinking, okay, well, Zach Taylor, I can't trust anything Zach Taylor does. Right. But at the end of the day, I wanted to see 20-plus touches out of Chase Brown. He had 8 on the first drive alone. Chase Brown looked really good today. And there's 2 other pieces that I think are worth talking about beyond just his 27 carries for 120 yards. One of the things that the Bengals talked about that they wanted to see improvement from Chase Brown was his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and make plays in that way. 5 catches for 37 yards on 5 targets. So he caught every ball that was thrown his way, didn't have any of the drops like he had last week. I thought that was a nice improvement as well. Had a nice touchdown. That was on a scramble drill where Joe Burrow was scrambling to his right. Chase Brown works his way open for the touchdown. I thought he showed some really good things in the passing game as well today, which is going to help his ability to stay on the field if and when Zach Moss does get back. The other thing that I've talked about time and time again on this show that I thought really showed itself today, the Bengals committed to the run, and what happened? the offensive line got in a groove,
That's
and they
right.
opened up some massive holes for Chase Brown today. That 21-yard run for him in the third quarter, I think it was, he had a giant hole on that play. And so much of it goes to that offensive line. And I talk about it, and there's no stat around it. I don't have a stat that says, oh, well, when the Bengals run the ball this many times, their offensive line does this PFF grade or whatever. At the end of the day, anecdotally, I think most people know that offensive linemen love to just get physical and push you around, and they can do that a lot more when the running game is in effect. And from the very first drive, they ran the ball the first 2 plays of the game, and they kept on with that throughout the entire game. It felt like the offensive line really got in a groove, was able to open up some holes for Chase Brown. And because of his explosiveness, he was able to really take advantage of some of those holes.
And I think that's something that the Bengals have wanted to see. I don't know if you've necessarily had the faith in him to give him this many carries when Zach Moss has been active. Your hand was forced today with a neck injury to Zach Moss, one that's looking like it might be pretty serious, that he might end up on IR and miss significant time during the season. It looks like we might get more out of Chase Brown in the next 4 weeks or so. So hopefully more of the same. I know it's the Raiders defense, but ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get excited about this Bengals offense when we have a chance, because there hasn't been very many chances to get excited about this team this year. So we're going to seize this opportunity, and Chase Brown certainly gave us a good reason to get excited today. Moving to the other side of the ball, the Bengals defense continues to play well against lackluster opponents. This is now really the 4th game against bottom-of-the-barrel offenses. The Week 1 loss against the Patriots, holding the Patriots to only 16 points. I know that game is always talked about in a bad light, but it was a good start to the season for the defense. Against the Giants, holding them to 7, holding the Browns to 14 with the touchdown at the very end of the game. And then this team is really played well against these bad teams, and they hold the Raiders to 24, but one of those touchdowns right at the end of the game, for the vast majority of this game, this defense was lights out. I mean, it's a pick 6 by Joe Burrow, which brings the Raiders over 20 points. Otherwise, we'd continue to have this streak against those bad teams, holding them under 20 points. I really like what I've seen out of this defense. I think it's a big building block out of the first couple weeks where we thought that we weren't going to be able to stop anybody. At least we can slow down the bad offenses. I think that's something that we can put a little bit of solace in as they move forward, is that this defense isn't the worst of the worst. We're able to slow down those bad teams, and that at least gives you a little bit of optimism as you move forward. Maybe these guys can get better in the short term and find a way to click like this against one of the good teams, because we do have a lot of good teams coming up. That's why I'm choosing to enjoy this game as much as I can, because as I've said before, Raiders, Chargers, Steelers, Cowboys, a 4-game stretch that's going to tell you all you need to know about this team on both sides of the ball. But today, another good showing by the defense against a pretty poor offense.
I think that's the most important thing, is that it was against a poor offense, and they did what they were supposed to. And they've done what they were supposed to do pretty much all season long. I mean, if you look at the matchups, they've done basically what you expected them to do, right? They hold the Patriots to 16. They give up points to the Chiefs. They give up points to the Commanders. At the time, Jaden Daniels was, red hot.
Yeah.
And they did. It's just, unfortunately, the Bengals defense is very predictable, right? Now, what I would hope that maybe this is a get right game, right? You've got the Eagles game now in your rear view. All right, let's refocus. Let's do what we're supposed to do. Raiders, not a very good team, both offensively and defensively. Let's take care of business, and let's go out and turn them down. And really, for, outside of that opening drive, they did that for the first 3.5 quarters or so. They get that touchdown with 13 minutes left to make it 31-17 or whatever on the pick 6, which wasn't their fault. So yeah, I mean, if you look at the Bengals defense overall, the 2 touchdowns that they gave up was the opening drive, which then they buckled down and they held the Raiders offense in check through the rest of the game. And the last drive of the game, that quite frankly didn't matter when they were in a prevent defense. So, I mean, overall, I think you have to be pretty happy with what you saw out of this Bengals defense. But again, they continue to do what you expect them to do. What happens on Thursday night?
That's right.
This will be a real big test with Lamar Jackson.
And that's the big question. Going into that last Ravens game, we hadn't seen really any reason to be optimistic about this defense. A 26-25 loss to the Chiefs, a 38-33 loss to the Commanders, allowing 24 points to Andy Dalton and the Panthers, and then turning around and giving you more of the same against the Ravens with a 41-38 overtime loss. This defense was abysmal from weeks 2 through 5. And then since then, they've looked much better with the exception of the one elite offense we played in Philadelphia that scored 37 points. So hopefully they can tap into this well, but much, much more optimism. At least we've seen better defensive play going into this version or this matchup against Baltimore as opposed to last time where we didn't even know it was out there. Hopefully the Bengals can remain healthy. We've seen the offensive side bitten by late week injuries the last 2 weeks. Fingers crossed that the defense doesn't fall to the same bug and is able to stick with it and have everyone healthy for this game as we go into Baltimore next Thursday. This last question isn't what you think, Craig. I'm sure you looked at the J bar and said, is he going to sit here and say he's back in after a 41-24 win over the Raiders? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I'm really close. I'm really close.
Oh, jeez.
I think if we're beating the Ravens away from being all the way back in, right? That's what this is asking. If we beat the Ravens on Thursday Night Football, everything is in front of us at 5-5.
I mean, there's a difference between having everything in front of you and being all the way back, Jacob. Like, if we beat the Ravens, oh my God. You can't sit here and look at last week where you lost 37-17 to the Eagles.
You're right.
And then turn around and say, we won one game against a trash football team in the Las Vegas Raiders. If we happen to pick up a win against the Baltimore Ravens, maybe I'm all the way back. No, it's just not true.
Okay.
Is there a world where the Bengals come out and if they beat the Ravens 41-24, maybe I'm leaning a lot heavier than I am today. But just beating the Ravens doesn't bring me all the way back yet. I
think that's fair. You talked me off the ledge a little bit.
I think the thing that we have to remember is exactly what you just talked about, is that there are a lot of really, really competitive games still on this schedule for this Bengals team. And ultimately, whether we want to admit it or not, the only way that this Bengals team makes the playoff is to be consistently good for the remainder of the schedule. We can't continue to have these up and down weeks like we've had over the last several weeks. Like, we have to just put together back to back weeks of high quality football if we want to make the playoffs. Right. Now, you're going up against teams where you absolutely can do that and make an impact. I strongly believe that the Bengals have the pieces to beat the Ravens, to beat the Chargers, to beat the Steelers, to beat the Cowboys, to beat the Titans, to beat the Browns, to beat the Broncos. Like, absolutely, they have the pieces to do that. They've just been too inconsistent for me so far. And if I'm being honest at this point, it almost feels like I'm not going to be all the way back until they clinch a playoff spot because I just have so little trust right now in the way things have gone. So, listen, I'm definitely not all the way back right now. We know that.
All right.
Am I gonna be back if the Bengals beat the Ravens on Thursday night? I'm gonna feel better. But there's just so much work left to do because you put yourself in the hole that you put yourself in through the first 8 weeks that it's really hard to get all the way back in until we're in. So
there's really not a spot this season without clinching a spot that you're completely out of the mix of missing the playoffs here. I think the ceiling for this team is getting to 10 wins, and that's what we always talk about as the wild card teams in the AFC. Obviously, this year the AFC's been much worse. I would wager that there's going to be a 9-win team in the AFC wild card spots just because of what we've seen so far by some of the teams that we expected to be there. But it doesn't necessarily mean the Bengals are going to have those tiebreakers. I think in order to feel confident with it, you got to get to 10 wins, and that means that you have an uphill fight with almost no wiggle room the rest of the way. The Bengals are going to have to buckle down and get the job done. A big one that cannot be overstated this week against the Ravens on a short week on Thursday Night Football. Craig and I will be back Tuesday to look back at this one. Probably a fun film day, if I had to guess. Probably a fun film day. Maybe not. Oh no, Craig's gonna poo-poo on my parade already, and we're not even Tuesday yet. But you guys will have to tune in 6 p.m. on Tuesday to find out. We'll have the key plays in here from the Bengals win over the Raiders, and we'll start to look ahead a little bit to the Thursday night matchup against the Ravens. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. Thank you for the likes on the live stream that forced me to do the push-ups. I'm feeling it in my shoulders. I'm not going to lie to you, Craig. I'm feeling it in my shoulders. Thank you to everyone who watched today. We appreciate it. Bengals win 4 wins now on the season, looking to get back to 500 next week on the short week against the Ravens. 41-24 is the final in Paycor against the Raiders. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.